I'm Dr. Mark Lewis, the Executive Director of NDIA's Emerging Technologies Institute, and welcome to Emerging Technology Horizons. On today's episode, I'm joined by Dr. Sutika-Sipus, who is going to talk to us a little bit about his work at Calypso AI, but also more broadly about artificial intelligence and national defense and a range of other issues, including how he wound up on this journey that brought him to work in artificial intelligence. With some of its obvious defense applications. A little bit of background on Mitchell. As I mentioned, he is at Calypso AI. He's the Senior Director of Artificial Intelligence and Customer Strategy. Mitchell's had a very long background in the field for a relatively short period of time, but you've packed a lot into that career. Was a White House Presidential Innovation Fellow. In that role, he was appointed by the president to drive massive change in federal agencies. I think some significant successes from your time as an innovation fellow. Was also detailed to the U.S. Department of State, Bureau of International Security and Nonproliferation, Office of Arms Verification and Compliance. Was detailed to the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency. But also of interest, Mitchell has a background starting new companies. He's got experience in the private equity world. So he brings rich background in academia, rich background in innovative business, background in government to his work at Calypso AI. In addition, Mitchell has a PhD from Carnegie Mellon in design and human-computer interactions. He also studied at the American University in Cairo and the University of Cincinnati. With a background in architecture and master city planning, so yet another skill that you bring to bear to your work at Calypso. He also has been a board member for the Sandbox Investment Board at MIT, and on the board of trustees of the Art Academy of Cincinnati. So Mitchell, you are truly a Renaissance man. Thank you for joining us for today's podcast episode. So hey, let me start out by asking you, tell us a little bit about your work at Calypso AI. What do you guys do overall, and what's your role there?
Well, Calypso AI is focused on the simple fact that we want to drive the adoption of AI because it does a lot of great things, and we really want to make sure that government is able to utilize the advantages of AI technologies. It's as straightforward as that. How we do that has continued to change. The company's only a little over 2 years, and what we've come to really focus on is the test and evaluation process within data science. So often, whether you're building models or you're trying to acquire models as an end user, the way that we test models today is based on often a convention, right, of testing on historical data, not necessarily future uncertainty. And we see real problems as a result. A couple of years ago, there was a plane crash, right, that was algorithmically informed, and part of the argument was that the test evaluation did not look at the broader set of parameters of how this plane might, what kind of conditions it might engage. Just last year, Zillow lost $860 million because of over-relying on its property assessment models, which are phenomenal as long as the world doesn't change. And unfortunately, COVID changed the world enough that they lost almost $1 billion, right? So these things happen all the time, and it makes it very difficult for the government to utilize machine learning, to buy machine learning, to work with machine learning, because we don't have acquisition standards, right, around machine learning. We don't have federal guidance on how a model is going to be procured. And, this puts a lot of organizations in a very difficult position because they have to sort of reinvent the wheel every time that they're interested in AI. So we work right there in that space, right? We make it possible to test machine learning models as a non-expert. We allow you to test for a variance of future conditions, not just historical alignment to your training data. And we also work with our customers to make sure that essentially they're going to have the tool that they really need, not just a piece of technology that they want, right? So however we can, through our products or through our services, it's every day helping drive that adoption.
So it's the chief engineer, Scotty, don't give them what they want, give them what they need philosophy of engineering.
Well,
Yeah.
I think often it's just a matter of giving people better
Right.
tools
Right.
so they can better understand their own
Yeah.
needs.
No, understood. So I know obviously in national defense, this is extremely important. I would frequently point out to folks that, if your Facebook algorithm misidentifies some stranger as your Uncle Harry, well, you laugh about it, no harm, no foul. If a defense system misidentifies some innocent stranger as a wanted terrorist, that can be a really bad day for lots of people. So the consequences of failure for national defense are really important. Am I on the right track there? Or?
I no, 100%. Right now there are a lot of tools out there to study how these models perform over time and see if you get drift between your model, between the intention of your model, right, and what's really happening. Like you said, though, Mark, if we have drift in our models in the context of national defense, we're already too late, right? We need leading indicators. We have a customer through TSA Labs that has lots of models that they would like to use for, critical national security needs. But they need to make sure that those models are going to be trusted, because if they don't, right, bombs get on planes, people get hurt, problems occur every day that none of us want. And I know you have a background in aeronautics, right? So I'm sure test and evaluation has been a rich part of your life in terms of understanding what might happen, not just what was the design of the system.
Right. No, you're exactly right. I mean, in aerospace, we first obviously we do analysis, but we do wind tunnel testing. But we know that the wind tunnel never quite reproduces real conditions. So then you do flight testing, and you combine all of them. But you never get to absolute reality until you build the aircraft and fly it.
It's a little more art than science at
There's
the
no,
end of the
yeah,
day, no matter how scientific we want
yeah.
to
There's
be.
an element of that, and what I'm resonating with every especially in recent times, you've had people stand up and say, we don't really need to do test and evaluation anymore because we've got such great computer models and our computational capabilities are so incredible. And invariably, whenever someone has tried to do that, they've been bitten. We
Right. I'm sure the shareholders of
yeah
Zillow, might have agreed at some point in
yeah
time, right?
yeah
And then apparently the world just keeps changing. And so, often if we can find ways to expand the range of possibility and our understanding, right, of how models fit in our lives, how they fit in the background of our lives, how, for example, you mentioned, my background is city planning. And like a lot of people, got excited by the rise of autonomous vehicles. But one thing I often thought about from the very beginning is how over time our infrastructure will need to change in response to these autonomous vehicles. Maybe we start designing sidewalks differently. Maybe bus stops start showing up in different kinds of locations or meeting different kinds of population needs. If the technology is always shifting super fast, it's a slower rate of change, but all of the social support systems and all of the technical infrastructures of our society end up changing too. And the same thing resonates within model deployment and international security. It's constantly a give and take.
yeah no absolutely. So one of the things that I found when I was in the Pentagon is people threw the terms artificial intelligence and machine learning around very freely. It was surprising how few people actually knew what that meant, and and even more surprising how much I would say almost naivete there was about what artificial intelligence could do or not do. Our joke was we had people in the department who thought they could just walk into an artificial intelligence store and buy a can of artificial intelligence and sprinkle it on whatever thing they're working on. And uh, do you could you comment on that? Do you think we have a good common understanding?
It's difficult because I think a lot of people get excited by what they read, and for good reason. We see companies in private sector that are accomplishing significant business goals, right? During my time in private equity, we took a portfolio that was a few $100 million in businesses, and through the strategic deployment of machine learning, transformed it into a multi-billion-dollar portfolio in a matter of years. One of those companies, which was only 4 years old, went on to go public at 4 years for a $2.1 billion valuation. And part of that is it's entirely because of the advantages of machine learning. But for most purposes, uh, you know, standard statistical methods will work. And there's, the simple reality that since machine learning wasn't really thought about for a long time, the way that we collect data now, the way that we store data, move data, share data, talk about data, a lot of that's just not really aligned to that goal, right? Uh, one of the things I really love about the way that AWS talks about machine learning and business is from the context of working backwards, right? And so you have to ask the question, well, given the current state of reality, what is the state that you would prefer? And do you have the data to help you get to that state? And if you don't, well, then you have to start there. And if you do have some data to start working with, then how do you work backwards to that algorithm, right? To that model, rather than just trying to like slap some stuff together and find out what's going to happen. It does take a lot of ad hoc experimentation. Nothing is truly off the shelf. And in fact, this is entirely, sort of the outcome of a lot of work at Calypso AI, is that you need more stakeholders who can be a part of the conversation than just a data scientist. So, how do you translate these complex data science concepts to everyone else so that you can leverage their subject matter expertise? Because that's really what's going to make the impact. It's not just about the numbers.
So I really appreciate that observation. And in that end, we spent a lot of time talking about workforce and finally getting the best and the brightest working on the problems of interest in national security. Do you think the department can? Well, it's almost a question that almost answers itself. But do you think the department is doing an adequate job in attracting the best and the brightest? Or we've heard stories of some backlash against applications of AI to defense systems. Any observations on that? Or
I've gotten to participate in a range of initiatives over the years, whether it's some of our software factories, like the Bespin initiative out of the Air Force and Kessel Run, or through the emergence of DIU, right? Which, when I was a presidential innovation fellow, Mike Brown was hired at the time that I was a PIF, and he was starting DIU. And I watched it close and far all these years and saw how it's matured and have seen the talent that has come, right? Because these avenues have been created to access the talent. I'll be honest though, I'm much more excited about the way our agencies have changed to work with private sector companies and entrepreneurs, right? Bringing the talent through entrepreneurship is a powerful way to get the results and reduce overhead. And as someone who has been a civil servant and as a entrepreneurial addict, I guess you could say, right? I started my first business when I was 20, and it's been 20 years now, right, of companies that have succeeded and failed, right? But I remember starting my first AI company in 2013, and there was all this stuff about Project Maven and standing up to Jake, and I thought, wow, I'm just going to blow this up. And I had almost, I think, 100 meetings within 4 months, and I felt like I was stuck on a hamster wheel, right? And now, 9 years later, we have all of these initiatives. The SBIR process has transformed dramatically. New financing initiatives have come into place. Calypso AI, we have an AFWorks Technical Financing Award, right? Because of the continued impact of our work. The way that even just, while there's still a long way to go with acquisitions for, say, machine learning models, being able to bring the talent through these collaborations with companies, through these software factories, all of that has been profound. And I'm excited to see that.
I'm intrigued by the observation that some of the early AI work was, of course, funded by the Department of Defense, and then the DoD really fell behind in getting the commercial world back in support of DoD activities. It's kind of come full circle. Yeah.
Well, it goes back to that working backwards premise, right? When So before I went into AI, I spent many years working as an entrepreneur in East Africa, in the Middle East, and in Afghanistan, basically building data for GIS maps and analysis, right? I was a city planner. I was working in conflict zones. I never had the data I needed. And so I started a business to build that data and to sell it to others. And so over the years of doing that work, I came to see a lot of opportunities for the technology, went to do a PhD at Carnegie Mellon, thought, I didn't appreciate how much I was surrounded by the very cutting edge of AI, ML, and research, and started, building this team and went back to the government agencies and said, look at all these things we can do. And people would say, I just wish I had a database, right? And so that's really, we're in a such better position today, right? Because we've now had 10 years of people thinking about that database and getting that data together. And there's still work to do, but it's all
What about
constantly
security
changing.
of that
It's
database?
very
Because
encouraging.
that's something, of course, the Department of Defense worries a lot, right? A clever adversary would try to
Sure.
corrupt the data, the data set, and maybe in subtle ways.
Right. You, that's always a wicked problem, right? And uh, I recall when the former director of the NSA was at an event at National Defense University. I was lecturing over there at the time, and he talked about how his biggest concern that kept him up at night was that the very baseline data, the ground truth that we rely on, was actually manipulated before we got to it, right? And you can do some Google searches. It's all around the internet that for years there's been a lot of concern about adversarial activity, hacking our commercial satellites, manipulating imagery before it's even transmitted to our agencies. And obviously that has massive repercussions, right? When we rely on this information for not just national security, but economic projections, agricultural analysis, flood impact mitigation, you name it, right? Partnerships, funding. So, there's a lot of things that we can do that are conventional. One of the things that we do at Calypso AI, though, is when we're looking at the side of how the model works with data. A standard part of our testing process is testing that model for its resilience to adversarial manipulation. If that data that's flowing into the model has been modified, how much modification is necessary before the model starts to give you the wrong information, right? Before the satellite can't identify the movements of troops or that nuclear research facility that's violating international treaty. How much can the model take? And I'll be honest, one of the things I'm really excited about that we've done is we've also tried to identify what's the minimal footprint in image manipulation necessary to trigger that model failure. So if you have a human in the loop, a lot of the times you can see, there's funny neon pixels popping up on an image or something. You'd say, wow, this is suspicious. But if the adversary is very sophisticated and the imagery has been manipulated in ways that you can't see, and it will trigger model failure, we want to be able to catch that threshold. Just what is the minimal amount of manipulation necessary to make that model fail? And it's an automated process. You upload your model, and in a matter of hours, right, we're running 40, 50 tests, and that's part of it, so that everyone gets to see how much can it take.
Interesting. There's an analogy I can think of during the Cold War. Soviet submarines turned out to be pretty easy to detect because they were pretty noisy, and they made a sound that sonar operators described like a constantly flushing toilet. And there is a very famous question that was posed once: what if every Soviet submarine had this special cam in its drive shaft that made this noise, and on day one of the real conflict, that cam comes out and they all go silent? And it's an interesting question. Someone contaminating your data set, and then when the real conflict comes,
Yeah,
oops. Yeah,
right.
yeah, absolutely. So let me switch gears a little bit. There's been a lot of discussion about ethical limits on the use of AI. Ethical limits, especially having an artificially intelligent system making decisions, weapons decisions, weapon drop decisions. Should machines be shooting at people? Is this something you've come across in your work at Calypso, and how do you address
Absolutely.
it?
It's one of the reasons I work at Calypso, But my experience with these problems goes back a long time, right? Where when I was doing that work as a city planner, trying to build data in complex environments, I lived in Kabul for 3 years, and during that time, I was flying to Mogadishu to work with the mayor of Mogadishu directly. I worked a lot with city mayors and was trying to build the basic data we needed to stabilize and rebuild the city. At one point in there, I had a contract with the DoD contract to map a range of facilities, whether it was schools or medical infrastructure, things like that. And I knew that was important data because that's allows one on the operator side to have confidence that they're going to make the right decision when they are targeting the bad guy, right? And it keeps people off the news. But what I realized is that there was an art to doing that. How we define a school, how we define a medical clinic, where I live in Pittsburgh is not necessarily the same as a village just outside of Mogadishu. Often a water tank, right? If you could find a water tank, that counted as really the public health infrastructure, And so what I came to understand was how local so many of the answers are to these big, complex problems, right? As long as we keep wrestling with these abstractions around ethics and AI, it's going to be very hard for us to reach a lot of confidence on what to do tactically. But when we can look at a conceptual or a geographically local set of conditions, right? A lot of the times we're able to actually have a much more robust conversation because we're talking about tangible things, tangible outcomes, tangible impacts, not just quantifiable, but observable phenomena. And so that's really the approach that drives a lot of the work I do. It informs some of what we do at Calypso. If you're going to deploy a model into a given environment, then what are the range of possible weather conditions? There's a lot of times companies that are creating capabilities, say for automated target recognition, they're relying on data that was collected domestically with flyovers here in the United States. And those models are being deployed in UAVs that are going over Somalia or Belize. But Oklahoma, Belize, and Somalia are radically different environments. So those conversations on ethics are hard to have unless we actually start tuning in to what those local conditions are and setting ourselves up to succeed within them.
Right. No, I understand. That makes sense. Hey, I want to switch gears a little bit. You've had such an amazing career progression, from as you were just telling us, from Mogadishu to Calypso AI. Tell us a little bit about your professional journey.
What happened?
Yeah.
Well,
yeah.
Mark, I know you also have an unusual
not nearly as
background,
interesting
right?
as yours.
So
I've certainly didn't spend any time in Mogadishu or East Africa. So.
Well, the truth is, I grew up in a sort of a line of entrepreneurs and unusual people. My father was a jockey, and I grew up in the horse racing industry, and my mother was a bodybuilder, and I was very good at drawing, and there wasn't really a lot of means to go to college, but I found I could get art scholarships, and art school is not usually a place that one starts out in a career in national security or artificial intelligence or engineering, but it's a place where you learn to trust your instincts, be creative, be comfortable with being uncomfortable, right? Allowing yourself to take risk and try things, even if they don't make sense. And a lot of those experiences started to codify my early understandings of innovation. If you're truly innovative, you're often very alone. People disagree with you. You are doing things that don't necessarily make sense until later in retrospect, when everyone goes, that was brilliant, right? You have to have a confidence and a boldness to strike out on your own. And starting in art school, I was nurtured in this environment, but then they gave me an award to travel anywhere in the world. And I decided I was going to hitchhike across Southeast Asia for 100 days, ended up getting malaria in central India, lost all my money in an ATM bug. It was bad. I lived with a family for a while who had very little. And and it started making me think about what I could do with this education in creativity and abstract reasoning. And looking at the problems around me, I decided that was where I was going to focus my efforts. And so I skilled up, right? I went back to grad school for architecture and city planning, and threw myself into these environments. I took a student loan for $5,000 and moved to a refugee camp in East Africa. And but then I realized again I wasn't sufficiently effective because I didn't understand enough about the legal systems in place that define uh, how these parts of the world operate. So I did a Fulbright to Egypt. Ended up building a gang violence initiative with a woman there named Natalie Forcier, where we basically immersed ourselves in the lives of 200 young men from South Sudan who had been marginalized and displaced into Cairo, and then again found themselves marginalized and displaced, and started resorting to violent tactics and robberies and all sorts of things. And really, continuing to immerse myself in these places, and starting to think
By the way,
more about
that sounds
data.
really
And
dangerous. I'm just going to put that out there. Yeah, I
yeah,
can
we had
imagine. Yeah.
problems, right? But ultimately, I think a lot of times the way that you take, um, the way sometimes you make the biggest impact on really complex problems is you find the thing that is most boring and you take it as far as you can go, right? So city planning is really boring. It's, people think of city planning and they'd say, oh, it's about zoning and stop signs. And I took it as far as I could go into gang violence and
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
Mogadishu. Um, and same thing then with moving into AI, right? Moving into autonomous vehicles. Uh, I could be worried about taxi cabs. I could be worried about programming better user interfaces, but we have bigger needs as a global community, right, around security, having a better world, and making sure that we're using AI responsibly to get there.
Excellent, excellent. As I said, absolutely fascinating. Um, so, so thank first of all, thank you for everything that you're doing. You're obviously making incredible contributions, especially the work that you're doing has applications to national defense, something that our listeners are mostly are passionate about. Um, and thank you for joining us for this podcast. I've really enjoyed this conversation.
Yeah, this has been a lot of fun. I look forward to seeing how the U.S. government and the Department of Defense continues to change the way it works with people like myself. There's a lot of hardworking individuals out there in the AI, ML, and data science space that want to bring value, right? And historically, it was very difficult. And so, as new doors open, as new initiatives get off the ground, new contracting vehicles, new creative partnership processes, I'm confident that we will continue to see more people come to the table and great things come out of it.
I'm obviously a very big fan of the best and the brightest working on problems of national defense. They're some of our existential challenges, and I think they're some of our most noble challenges. And so your optimism is well timed because I also think it's really important that we get smart people working on some of the problems that we're facing. It's a very challenging world with some, just watching what's going on in Ukraine reminds us there are some bad people out there who wish us harm, and if we can apply our tools, apply our capabilities to defending our nation, defending our principles, I think it's an incredibly noble scientific endeavor. So again, thank you for what you do, thank you for what Calypso AI is doing, and thank you for joining us on this podcast.
Thanks, Mark. It was great to be here.